My name is Maren Schoormans, and I'm in horticulture my whole life. I worked for leading companies like Priva, Corporate Biological Systems, and the Reuter Seeds. And right now, I'm an entrepreneur, and I help companies to change, improve, or scale. So glad to be here.
Good morning. I'm Henry Gordon-Smith, founder and CEO of Agritecture Consulting. I am not a farmer. I grew up in big cities like Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Moscow, Russia. But I got interested in how cities could be drivers for sustainable and resilient agriculture and adapt to climate change. So what we do is we consult entrepreneurs, cities, governments, and multinationals all around the world on strategies to plan, design, and implement urban farms.
Good morning. Thanks for inviting us. Very interesting attempt to zero in on topics we all care about. Name is Thomas Zoellner, Secretary General of FarmTech Society. Background a bit of consulting from conventional feed crops, starting in potatoes in 2004. Invented with a Dutch company and Wageningen a model to identify an infection period in potato production. At that time, nobody talked about AgTech. Of course, it was not adapted and later on became a market standard. These days, I'm really spending a lot of time trying to push FarmTech Society on behalf of our members. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Tom and Henry. So, such an interesting topic. Vertical farming, urban farming, it tends to overlap a little bit. But let's start with urban farming, Henry. Why urban farming? Can you explain a little bit about it?
Well, urban agriculture is defined as the production of food within the city, but it also includes all of the various support services. So, for example, distribution solutions, even localization of food system markets, education programs, it all fit within the topic of urban agriculture. And urban agriculture typically also includes those kinds of edges of the city, what we call the peri-urban areas of the city, where there's kind of a mixture of the built environment and also vacant spaces and semi-agricultural spaces. And what we find globally is that overall, these spaces, including the areas in the center of the city, can be used for production of food from many different scales. Everything from market gardens that families may have in Asia to barter food to maintain their sustenance, all the way up to high-tech vertical farms and warehouses. So, urban agriculture isn't anything new. In fact, I think it's kind of interesting that we're coming back to it. We're trying to restore food in the city because previously we never used to build the places we lived without the resources we needed to survive. But as we kind of advanced as societies in the developed world, we said, well, we can centralize that somewhere else and import it. And there's been consequences to that, which I imagine we'll get into, but some of them are a lack of transparency in the food system, increased food miles, food safety risks, a disconnection from the labor and knowledge of how to grow food. And all of these have consequences that are becoming more apparent as climate change becomes more of a risk to our society. So the reason to encourage urban agriculture now is multifaceted, everything from solving those problems I just mentioned. But I think one of the major reasons for doing it is to really encourage adaptation to climate change by creating this new generation of individuals that live in an urban area where you have to kind of work within a dense environment, a very efficient environment, and solve these great challenges around food. So it creates a new generation of food security problem solvers.
Sounds really exciting, and I bet lots of people are excited about it, and the movement is catching on.
Absolutely, it's catching on. I mean, I started blogging about the topic. Agritecture was a blog that launched in 2010, 2011, and it's been incredible to see both how our audience has grown, but also the number of urban farming projects and high-tech urban farming projects like vertical farming that have emerged since then.
Yeah. I also talk to conventional growers and farmers, and they tend to be very skeptical. They say, well, this can never be profitable, this can never be efficient. However, everybody loves the idea of having a greener city, having rooftop farms, and improving the society by tapping into the food culture. So if you want to choose one of these two, like proving the conventional farmers wrong or boosting the idea of greening the city, what do you prefer? Where do you start?
Well, I think it's important to green the city, but there's a number of ways to do that, from green roofs to green walls, and those have certain benefits of biodiversity, rainwater management, aesthetic impact, and those are all important. But when we're talking about impacting food security, we really need to find the models that you can grow food profitably in the city. And I think people are very tough on urban agriculture. 9 out of 10 new businesses will fail, but for some reason when it comes to urban agriculture, we expect them to be better than that. Yeah. And conventional farmers tend to get subsidies. Urban farmers don't get any subsidies. So the ability to compete in that market is also very challenging, especially if this is new. So what's needed to really get this going are some incentives, some support. And when we see that cities, for example, like Paris or Singapore get involved, that shift from a challenging model to grow food in the city towards a profitable one starts to happen. And that's why what FarmTech Society is doing is so important, because we need to lobby governments to recognize that this has value in the food system. It's also really interesting to look at the production ability of these urban farms. Imagine you have a small, tiny apartment. You're going to use that space more efficient than a big, gigantic mansion. Sure. And so when you think about urban farming, the same thing happens. There's a lot of data, a lot of research that shows that urban farms can produce up to 50% more than conventional farms. And that's also because they bring in more diversity. That's also because they have a lot of access to other kinds of labor models. They approach it from a technological perspective that's different. And so I think it's really interesting that urban farming can actually be a meaningful impact for the urban food security, but also, that it can have that aesthetic impact you mentioned before. You can have a little bit of both, depending on the type. I don't think vertical farms are particularly aesthetic. They tend to be in boxes and things you don't see. Yeah. But as you move towards the more low-tech models, you can have that kind of architectural, agritectural aspect to it.
And the whole spectrum is valuable, I guess.
Yeah, I think the way we approach it and the way we started our business is that there's not one size fits all. I think anyone that's marketing that their model is the best way to do it everywhere is lying to you. Yeah. I think what we're trying to do is to say, when you approach farming in the city, you need to approach it like an architect. You need to utilize design thinking. You need to say, this is the site, this is the economic, social, environmental context of that site, and here is a whole list of models that I could apply to that site, typologies I could fit in. And no one does that for agriculture. Rarely people do that for agriculture outside of the city. So what we need to do in the city is approach it that way. And so what Agritecture does is we say, okay, let's start with some big ideas and what's possible, and let's narrow those down to the most viable solution for that site, whether it's a greenhouse or a vertical farm or soil-based. Each of them have their own individual value. For example, if you're in New York City and you build a soil-based farm, you can get millions of dollars in incentives for managing rainwater. You're not going to get that for doing a vertical farm, right? So there's certain reasons to go towards certain types of agriculture in certain regions. Climate is a big driver for that. Labor cost is a big driver for that. Each of these models have different performance metrics. So what we're trying to do is to say, there's this whole toolbox of urban farming models, some of them successful, some of them not. But when you match them with the urban site and the urban context, then you have a better chance of being successful.
It makes sense. And going back to the funding question, I'm also looking at Tom. Tom, you live in Brussels, you work in Brussels, European Union, European Community. So what do you think lacks at the policymakers to try and get this off the ground in Europe? Because in the US, there's a lot more activity in this movement than we see here.
Well, there's this twofold, this challenge of agriculture being recognized in the European Union as a kind of a deep knowledge, and there's no better example than going to the Netherlands to recognize that you have brought food production, particularly controlled environmental agriculture,
like to horizontal farming. Yeah?
Really, well, it's horizontal, but also it's actually when I look at what is happening, it's also increasing efficiency. Yeah? I mean, that's the name of the game. That's why I really, when I talk to policymakers, I always point out as one of the mantras they should recognize is that any farmer is in general a circular farmer. Period. Because farmers have a difference to the hunter and gatherers, and they are planning ahead. A hunter, which is close to what we happen with the fisheries today, these guys, they go out and catch the last fish. They just do it because that's all they know. They don't plan ahead. They don't plan, how do we going to fish next year? No, they're going to go after the last fish. A farmer, by definition, will always take care of his turf and of his resources. And this is very fundamental, that this is actually creating really a good basis for looking forward in integrating knowledge from advanced systems like controlled environment agriculture, and also this new phenomenon of vertical farming or urban agriculture. I mean, the complexity, of course, is lost in the shuffle when people really are debating about what is better, how does it work, and a lot of conventional agriculture looks upon controlled environment agriculture as something of a competition. Well, in reality, I can tell you that the demand for vegetables and fruit is going to double in the next 8 to 9 years. I mean, this is a fact. Yeah. Our nutrition will change from a very carbohydrate and protein based into a vegetable and fruit based one. And this is not just a fact in the new economies, but also in the old economies like Europe and the US, etc. I mean, the US has a great drive in implementing risk taking in private investments, and this is kind of like a strength of the pioneer spirit of America. And I spent 25 years there, so I know that it's not a big deal to actually fail. It's actually almost desired. You fail hard and fast, so you find out what works.
Difference. Yeah.
And here in Europe, we quite tend to be the opposite, and we tend to be hesitant of failing, and we tend to say, rather not fail. But if you not fail, you don't find out where the border, where are really the end of the rope of solving a problem. Anyway, I mean, the fact is that FarmTech Society is kind of, a desire of a lot of stakeholders who are not really represented in the policy arena. Yeah. And this is a bit the case with all controlled environment agriculture, because they're perceived as a niche.
Specialty crops.
Yeah. Specialty crops. I mean, it really, everybody looks at them as like, these are the last 5% we are producing nice to have things, but you can't feed the world with horticulture or with controlled environment agriculture. And I actually have to always correct that and say like, no, actually we provide the model of how to do it, because our current system is broken. I mean, now it has seeped into almost every boardroom of every major chemical and food processing company that they cannot create any growth anymore unless they really want to wreck the planet. And so controlled environment agriculture has a very interesting circular approach on things, which will forward a way of being efficient, making it a real let's say, margin for the farmer. Of course, now my big topic at the day is how do we create a differentiation for one head of lettuce grown in a vertical farm compared to it's grown in a field somewhere.
Because consumers don't know about it. They have no awareness
they
walk
whatsoever. Into Albert Heijn and to them looks like it's a salad costs 89 cents and they don't really have any idea was it grown in a vertical farm or was it grown somewhere in the field of Flanders, whatever. And that is a big problem.
Tom, do you think that products should be labeled as CEA grown or vertical farm grown?
Well, I think label is maybe a very low-hanging fruit, but labels tend to be also, confusing. Yeah. And we have too many labels. Yeah. People are complaining about, why aren't you get your, you look at other industries who are actually very savvy about, creating one level playing field for a certain product and have that differentiation really transformed into a purchase price. So, we really look at fundamentally actually creating a kind of measuring system, a certification system where you can actually differentiate and say, like, here's a head of lettuce. It has a carbon footprint of such a number, and that should be communicated to the consumer. And that will justify also a consumer willingness to actually pay more for a salad who is actually grown with a smaller carbon footprint. It's proven over and over again that actually consumers are willing to pay more if they have the information and they believe in it. It's now, true. This is, of course, now in my, let's say, memory, a topic, particularly also Maren and I have discussed for years now. Yeah. Seed companies, the greenhouse sector, all the growers are complaining about, why are we not recognized for what we're doing? And now comes the new the new form of agriculture, vertical farming, which is not recognized by regulation as a form in itself, needs to be really defined. So this is the moment really to bring this forward. And luckily, we have the open ear of retailers who really want to actually also do that or have to do that. Regulators need to be informed about that. And that I see is a bit of a disconnect. Even conventional growers here in the Netherlands who are really well organized when it comes down to doing a lot of things efficiently, but they're very inefficient on getting the policymakers to understand the actual needs and the actual challenges they face.
Exactly. You mentioned retailers, Tom. So have they changed over the past years in their willingness to do something else than just conventional and organic?
They haven't, but recently they started to understand that there is a big need for creating a kind of a sustainable product line. They have to come to the conclusion that really, also from their own basis of really improving their footprint, that they have to actually use a carbon counter in all their product categories. And they realize that bio is not giving them the sustainability they were hoping for. And this is, of course, controversial, and I'm not going to dwell on this, but this is the chance and the opportunity of controlled environment agriculture to point out that, please test our product, make it an independent evaluation. What is our carbon footprint? And bring it out to the consumer and let him know what this is.
Great. I suppose that's a good message towards all the greenhouse growers in Europe that are trying to get added value into their product.
I just want to comment on the retailers thing. I think it is shifting, especially in the past 2 years. We're seeing a big shift for the retailers to recognize controlled environment agriculture and vertical farming specifically as a solution. The main solutions that it responds to for retailers are the following. One, consumers want local food. That's what's competing with organic, especially in the United States and even more in Europe. So the data is suggesting that consumers will pay more for local food. These vertical farms, greenhouses can provide that local food, and that label is convincing to the consumer. Secondly, it's food safety. We've had the third food safety scare with romaine lettuce in the United States in a year. Yeah. Okay, so literally the Center for Disease Control is saying, do not eat romaine. If it's grown outdoors, throw it out of your fridge. But if it's grown in a greenhouse, keep it. Retailers are paying attention to that, right? They're saying, okay, I see that. I want to get my supply chain to be more CEA focused. And there are deals happening. Maybe you don't see them as much in the public. There are big deals happening with greenhouse companies in the United States. There are big deals happening with vertical farming companies in Europe and in Asia. We just saw that Carrefour in the Middle East just announced that they're introducing a vertical farm in their store there. InFarm has over 200 installations in retail stores. Yeah. I got to visit one of those, and I was pretty skeptical about InFarm, but when I visited it, it was interesting to hear what the consumers, I talked to some German consumers there at the store.
They're mainly in Germany, right?
Yeah, well, they're mainly in Germany, but they've expanded to Denmark, France, the United Kingdom. They just announced that they expanded to the United States and are installing in Seattle with Kroger, the second largest retailer in the United States. So they really are growing, very rapidly, and this model has convinced retailers to give it a try. Yeah. We'll see how it works long term, but they're giving it a try. And so when I talked to these, I was in Frankfurt and I was talking to some of these retailers, or these customers rather. I said, why do you care about this, right? And they said different things. One was, I really like that I can talk to someone because there's kind of an indoor farming display and then the herbs are displayed there. I like that I can talk to somebody about the product and they know how it's grown, they know where it came from, they can answer my questions. I also like that they talk to me about recipes that I can make with it because they have many different varieties of basil, not just one variety. So the same grower can give you a variety of things to cook with.
The grower is actually there in the store.
Well, there's basically like laborers that bring the product from a hub and that moves into the central store unit. And so they can talk about where it came from and how it was grown, and they can show you how it's growing now. But they can talk to you about the varieties of basil. And sometimes when you get the product basil from Morocco, you get one variety. But the most interesting thing I heard was they like that it was smaller. Consumers are beginning to care about food waste. And a lot of the conventional product is too big. And so when you cook with it, when you're a single person or a millennial, you don't need a gigantic thing of basil. You're going to waste it. So when they buy a smaller one, the margin is actually better for InFarm and the retailer, but the consumer's also happy because they're just getting the amount they need. So I think the ability for these urban growers to respond to those trends and work with retailers is quite unique. And that's the competitive edge that retailers are excited about.
You mentioned this really interesting new model. We're skeptically looking at it. Is of course it's a vending machine in a retail environment producing sort of fresh produce, which when I heard it for the first time, I thought like, well, that's a great joke, but it won't work. Because consumers will basically be up in arms. They're like, why should we eat a salad coming out of like a
machine?
A machine
with pink lights.
And surprisingly, of course, there are consumers who actually find that super cool and actually are trying it and then returning and wanting only that particular product because they say the superiority in freshness, in taste, in flavor is uncompared to all the rest of conventional or greenhouse grown herbs and lettuce.
Absolutely.
And this is a really great door opener for this type of product.
Absolutely. And if you look at the data around millennials and the generation after me, they're craving experiences. They don't just want to buy a product. They want to connect with the brand and the product in a deeper way. That's new. That's not something that existed before. Yeah. If you look at Airbnb, they've just launched more of their cooking classes experiences. And that's a big, big signal of how food is connecting to what they see around the data of how millennials are going to purchase and the brands are going to associate themselves with. And Airbnb has its own local food procurement strategy. This is going to spread one by one through corporations, retailers, large convention centers. It's going to become more of the norm, and it's really been interesting to see that shift. And I think it's driven by the demographic trends as well.
That's really interesting. So I heard you say in a previous presentation, I believe it was Australia, a very good one, by the way. I can recommend it to people, that there will be two groups of professionals in the industry. On one hand, it will be the technology companies, and on the other hand, the operators. Who will be those operators? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I'll elaborate on that statement. I think what I was trying to emphasize is that a lot of people entering the vertical farming space cannot decide if they're an operator or a technology company. So it's pretty common that someone will build a vertical farm and discover some innovation. Maybe they have an automated rack, maybe they have an automated seeding system, maybe they thought the solution that was off the shelf was too expensive, so they hacked it, and they're like, oh, we can make money off selling this now. But that distracts them from the core business of farming that's very difficult and very day-to-day operations focused. So I see a lot of my clients, a lot of people in the industry struggle with this divide. And we actually have an article published that Urban Crops wrote, Are You a Technology Company or an Operator? You have to decide, on our blog, so you can read about it. But I think just to go a little bit deeper, if we think about the industry of vertical farming, the foundation has to be the operators. Then above that is the hardware providers. Then above that is the software providers. And then above that is the service providers, or maybe you could say even nonprofit organizations like FarmTech Society. If that foundation of that pyramid is not the largest piece, the industry will really struggle to scale. The industry will struggle to succeed because we all depend on the farmers having successful models, successful ability to grow and sell these products. Right now, I think the hardware area is a little too big. I think it's bigger than the foundation in a lot of ways. That's where we're seeing, when you see the reports on how big the vertical farming industry is, a lot of that is the size of the LED companies and the sales that they're making. So we need to really shift that. And I think the key there is the best practices around it. And that's why I was really interested in what you're talking about with how do you teach growers, introductory best practices, how do you teach them to use CEA. Priva, I got to demo their Priva Academy yesterday. These are the things that are going to really transform the industry because most of the operators, as you saw from the CEA census we did with AutoGrow, are new. It's their first time. They've never done it before. They've never farmed
60%
before.
60% of them is new to the industry.
So are they going to go to school and take a 4-year horticulture degree and then do 2 years of operating a greenhouse? Probably not. We need technological solutions, modern education solutions for them to learn faster. And with CEA, I think you can learn faster. It's in some ways, it's easier to learn than other types of agriculture. So that's what's going to transform that and help the operators have the operational best practices that I see most often are missing across the board and are most often the reason why these farms fail long term is because they get too focused on the equipment or they get too focused on their brand and the cool factor. But they really miss the fact that farming is hard and it requires consistent daily habits to keep pests out, to keep the food safe, to keep the leaks from happening, to keep everything in production and efficient all the time. And that's the bottom line.
I agree. It's actually the same as in any type of farming or horticulture. You need that hands-on training to make people known with the equipment and the marketing and every aspect of their business. Well, looking at technology.
May I lean into this?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Just quick, earning a living from growing food is a very challenging occupation, and it has been not very popular. I mean, as we all see that farmers are kind of like, on average, 60, 70 years old. And of course, the interesting part is as we have young people come in via technology into this industry, which is really exciting. And I think this is the purpose, what we actually need to put technology before we actually know how to use it. And this has worked in other industries, by the way, too. And we always think, we can fix it with technology. Well, it's not so simple. We will also have the pioneer factor get killed and the settlers get rich. However, the actual fact is that also tinkering with technology will create a very interesting learning environment. And as I see it now, and we are really pushing a very interesting initiative with Erasmus+, where we actually see controlled environment agriculture as a STEM education model. Yeah. Whether it is for middle school, you can even start at kindergarten if you want. Mm-hmm. If you have a tabletop lab and you can do tinker.
They're available by the way.
Yes, they are. They're available very easily. Yeah. Very inexpensive too. Yeah. Up all the way to PhDs. You can bring in a kind of a life system, which is an applied method to do actual scientific experiments and comparative scientific applied experiments, entrepreneurial training. I mean, this is what better thing could be to train a student to be an entrepreneur on a food model, because that is really tough, right? Then also interesting is that you have the engineering aspect in it. You have, of course, also to a certain degree the math. Even applied math. Today people are struggling in education how to apply math.
Or physics.
I mean, this is all in there. And so it really is now on the brink of being discovered as that is actually a very cool way of training people. And I'm talking about not just creating researchers, because, there are plenty of agriculture-oriented horticulture courses which provide plenty of candidates for research. But what we need is actually operators. And there it is. And there where we want to actually really make a big point that if we don't solve that educational challenge, we don't even need to talk to policymakers, because then nothing will happen really at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
So very big,
try
big
to convince my daughters to go for a career in horticulture. I know how hard it is, but it's like these initiatives and the coolest parts of the spectrum that really attract these people. And we have to talk to education institutions as well.
Absolutely. Exactly. And in the supply chain, we have lots of different professions engaged. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be an operator at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
But if you have an exposure in your education to horticulture or to controlled environment agriculture, if you add, for instance, aquaponics, which is an absolutely beautiful model to bring almost everything you can possibly think into education, and then ultimately have people go into career paths which have a meaning and are actually also graduating and then get a job. This is another big thing that education is failing today, particularly look at the US. Holy shit. What is the actual student debt right now? I think it's over $1 trillion.
It's the biggest single debt source in the United States.
This is insane. And here in Europe, they are thinking we shouldn't do the same thing. But I look at the university and they do the same mistakes. So
I just want to add some more accent to what Tom said. So Square Roots, which was Kimball Musk, Elon Musk's brother, hired us to develop this vertical farming accelerator. And I was quite skeptical, but I knew there was energy around the topic through our blog. And what was really, really fascinating is that when we opened up this application for 10 containers, that each entrepreneur would get one container, we had 480 individuals apply for this program. It was an unpaid program. They had to commit to 1 year. They had to take out a $1,500 USDA loan, so they had to take on financial risk. And 480 individuals decided that they wanted to do this program and apply to learn vertical farming. And I thought that was really, really interesting. I interviewed 70 of them, got to learn about their psyche until we chose the final 10. And what was really even more interesting is that as they went through this process, they were exposed to things that Tom was talking about, the relationship between food, energy, water, and waste. And when we're talking about the great challenges of urban development, that's what we need to unlock. And so I invite anyone listening to think about what is an urban technology, a sustainable technology that embraces that nexus better than vertical farming. Nothing does. There is not one single technology that does that more. Solar panels take one part of it, biodigesters another part of it, but vertical farming has to embrace all of that. Yeah. And as we start moving towards the solutions for the economical models for this, we're going to unlock new things about how the city can be more sustainable and resilient. I also want to add that some of these farmers, when they graduated, who had no farming experience before, decided to go into organic, soil-based agriculture outside of the city. And so they did apprenticeships, and they went deeper into the agricultural system, separate from hydroponics and vertical farming, which I also find very fascinating. Some of them went towards retail, some of them went in other sustainability directions. So the power of actually giving young people access to this technology to explore it is really underestimated and has a lot of potential. I'm going to add a little bit more. You will see if you keep it. But I'm a board member at Teens for Food Justice, which is a nonprofit organization that converts unused spaces in classrooms in very, very marginalized communities, at-risk communities in New York City. What we do is we convert them into vertical farms. We teach the students how to build the farms, how to manage the farms, and then they sell the product to their students in the cafeteria. They distribute it. They also have a food box that's kind of like a CSA model where they can sell it to their families and other people. And what we're seeing is test scores are going up. We're seeing the questions they're asking are getting more sophisticated. Confidence is going up. Math skills are going up. And the data is really compelling, which is why the organization is able to raise so much more money and is planning to develop 100 of these throughout New York City. So it's not just a great idea like, hey, let's grow food and have students learn this. There's actual data that's showing that it's making an impact and transforming both their food security and their overall knowledge and intelligence.
That's really interesting. So who's funding this? Because I get every experience here in Europe that it's hard to have educational institutions to put money aside to do this. They don't have any. So how do you?
Well, I think if you look at traditional education, there's not a lot of funding going into it in the U.S. We're trying to shift that. Cornell, UC Davis, University of Arizona, these are institutions that already have a rich history in this. Yeah. Canada is putting a lot of money into it, trying to advance their agricultural programs to be competitive. But I'm really talking about unconventional education programs like Square Roots, like Teens for Food Justice, New York Sunworks is another one, like these programs that are online and available. Agritecture is launching some online business planning classes for urban agriculture next year. So these are the unconventional ones that are going to accelerate this topic and again, improve the number of operators that are able to succeed in the long term.
Exactly. So it makes a lot of sense to get young people acquainted to technology, to growing plants, to get that awareness. But if we skip down to the professional level, there's a lot of technology, right? There's a lot of things for sale. We've seen it at GreenTech Amsterdam. You can buy lots of different versions of each technology, which calls for standardization, I guess, because as a starting entrepreneur in vertical farming, I wouldn't know where to start. Which LED do I take?
How long have we been talking about standardization, Tom? I think it's been 6, maybe 8 years.
Yeah. It started actually when I did this potato model.
Don't stop doing that.
Yeah. No. I mean, it's actually coming to a really interesting head too. And as you are, in your career, you have come across, of course, a great number of companies who contributed a lot to optimizing, to increase efficiencies. But when I really look at how successful, for instance, the greenhouse builders are actually standardized their systems to make it an actual plug and play, I always thought that could be a model for us. But I see you shaking your head. Do you have any reservations
there's been pleas for standardization in the greenhouse building business for a long time.
Yes.
However, the customers, they keep demanding tweaks, changes, different varieties of those things. So you end up with 100,000 different setups and configurations, which each require their own knowledge and skills to get them going.
So.
One size fits none. Huh? So
that's right.
Yeah, as I said earlier.
So in vertical farming, which is a very young industry, you can make a new start.
Let me answer the question.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm the co-founder of the Association for Vertical Farming, which was prior to FarmTech Society, and I resigned from that position in summer of 2017. But we were trying to standardize, and we were trying to get the technology companies to work together to do this. Now, what I realized was that the entrepreneurs, they needed a methodology. They didn't just need standardization. They needed to know how to think critically about these decisions before they could even look at a database of standards, right? So that's what Agritecture started doing. And we actually did it originally through the AVF, through these workshops, where we would get entrepreneurs together, architects, all these people interested, and we would choose a site and we would design a farm for that site and help show them the differences between soil, greenhouse, and vertical to get to those conclusions. When you arm people with these methodologies, they have the power to go to GreenTech and recognize what they need because they can think critically about it. Right? If you're more informed about the types of cars that are there and how you might choose that, if somebody teaches you that, you're going to be better when you go and shop and choose a car. The same thing applies here. So I think it's about arming them with methodologies. Now, unfortunately, when I was communicating this at one of the annual meetings, some of the AVF members, including large lighting companies, said, "Why are you talking about soil-based urban agriculture to our members, to our community? You need to only talk about vertical farming." And that's when I realized that my values did not align with the organization and I had to resign. And so what Agritecture has been doing since then is we've been teaching our clients through creating matrices for how they can choose equipment, step-by-step methodologies that makes them no longer need us after we first consult them. And that's what we're arming them with. Long-term, and coming up next year, we're going to be launching a digital service, a digital farm planning software, where entrepreneurs anywhere can learn this methodology and help make the decisions to plan their farm online in a very inexpensive way. And that's going to accelerate the industry further because I think we need to arm the entrepreneurs with the most critical methodology possible so they can be good observers of the trends, see through the bullshit, and actually know where they should spend their money appropriately so they don't waste it and end up with failed farms.
That makes sense. How do you see that, Tom? From your perspective?
You know, the fact is it's a stony road. Huh? I mean, we all have chosen to actually engage with topics which can be very controversial. Huh? However, I think, you know, the interesting part is that after years of, kind of like optimizing and creating better efficiencies, all of a sudden we experience a disruption. And the disruption is coming from, let's say, introducing daylight independent growing as a kind of like a complete new way of looking at how we do things. Huh? And there, of course, the lighting companies have been up in arms about, you know, should we do this? Should we not do this? And it's an interesting discourse and it's settling down a little bit. I mean, you know, things are flying, but, you know, aren't we really interested, all of them, including, you know, market, you know, leaders, to create a very interesting manufacturing standard, a measuring standard on all these new types of technologies, because that will empower the industry as a whole, create a level playing field for not only the operators but also for the market leaders, huh? And that is, of course, recognized. I mean, you know, of course, you know, it is not so easy to file these discussions, and you know, we're now really also engaging in earnest to sit down and create not just the lowest common denominator on topics like how do you measure this or how you do that, but you know, bring in sort of really bright ideas and then discuss them and see how could we. Hey, Mariska.
Hello.
Hey, Mariska.
Hey. You heard the words, the GreenTech.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I think, you know, the example I brought with the greenhouse, you know, suppliers creating a standardized system to have a plug and play, which obviously also is not one size fits all. At least it allowed the whole industry to actually go global. Huh? Yeah. You have to not forget that. And without that, I think, you know, yes, you can build a lot of different systems and there's a lot of tweaks and this and that, but certain parameters need to be really identified as a kind of a common denominator. Yeah. And then you can go beyond or below or in the medium. Huh?
Excellent.
Right now, that I see is happening. We are getting really good feedback on that.
So listening to
many stakeholders.
Listening to this, Tom, and looking at where I come from, the Dutch technology sector, we just saw the annual list of the top 100 companies called Hillenraad 100, where all the best companies are listed and explained about their qualities. And when I read that, only 5 of these 100 companies are listed because they have some activity or awareness or attention into vertical farming. So are we missing the train in the Netherlands? Can you both try and answer this?
I mean, I think the Dutch approach to agriculture is both aggressive and conservative. And I think that that's a good thing. And I think that in contrast, the US approach has been very fail fast, and that has its own value. But I think that the Dutch have actually done it the right way. I think that they've been skeptical. I think that they've been good observers. And I think we've seen that GreenTech has started to approach this in their exhibitions of allowing a voice for vertical farming, which is now creating this discussion in the Netherlands even more actively. Yeah. The Dutch see the economic opportunity, so the lighting companies are getting involved very actively, but they're being very selective about the kinds of products they provide and the price point for those. So I actually have a lot of faith in the Dutch solution to vertical farming in the long term.
Yeah. Tom?
Well, nationally speaking, the Dutch are very proud of themselves, and they should be. Internationally speaking, they're also very proud, and they also contribute to quite a lot of contributions, which are really valuable. When it comes down to new disruptive technology, which is not really homegrown, then they tend to actually feel critical about it, and that's also a kind of a normal, I would say, grower behavior. I mean, as way of dealing, farmers are first critical, and then they like to see it work. And if it does work, then they open up to it. And this is, of course, as you said, aggressive at the same time, a conservative approach. I would add to the fact too that what is currently a horizontal underglass model works very well. No need to really disrupt that, or do we? I mean, I'm asking you. I mean, the demand for 5,000 hectares every year. Who's going to build that? Is it going to be really the existing industry is capable of doing it? Because the demand for underglass horizontal production is enormous, and the demand for even more efficient systems in climate situations where glass houses make no sense is just gargantuan. And is it going to be car companies who are going to build those?
I don't know, but new players are going to enter the arena, that's for sure. And the existing ones are going to try to add the most value by having the, let's say, the exceptional technologies and the turnkey solutions that help people get started and get a profit more rapidly. And I think we need the whole spectrum, going from simple plastic tunnels towards high tunnels, high-tech glass houses, semi-closed greenhouses, up to the vertical farm without daylight. So I'm very excited to see what the mix is going to be. I think it depends on the market and the financiers that are available and the market prices for the products that are generated. Second to that, I think that for the time being, fruity crops like tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, eggplants, at this moment, the best place to grow them is in the greenhouse.
Absolutely.
As these vertical farms, they're very good for leafy greens, for herbs, microgreens, and those kind of things. So I'm also wondering, when are we going to see new crops besides the leafy crops in those vertical farms, Henry?
Yeah, this is always the hot question, vertical farming, right? So, I think we're starting to see some companies like 80 Acres grow tomatoes in fully enclosed, no daylight environments. I think the ways they're able to do that effectively is because under the 80 Acres brand, they can sell a whole variety of product. You can buy the lettuce, the microgreens, the herbs. You can also buy the tomatoes. Yeah. So I think that they can adjust pricing to get a customer that's buying their whole brand that can make sense, similar to if you buy a basket of product versus buying one product within that basket. So there are models for that. I don't know if that's going to work everywhere. I actually don't think so. But when we work on a lot of vertical farming models in the Middle East, we see that cherry tomatoes can be quite competitive in vertical farms in these extreme climates. So there'll be certain parts of the world where we'll see vine crops of certain kinds be some of the next products. Strawberries are, of course, being explored by many, many companies right now. I think the challenge is that as you get a new crop in vertical farming, you have to start over again with the automation solutions to maintain low labor costs. So once we figured out how to reduce the labor cost, which is such a significant operational cost around lettuce and microgreens and herbs, now we've got strawberries that work technically, but we have to now do the labor challenge for that. So there's always going to be new challenges as we enter new crop categories. But I think in the next 5 years, we'll start to see more strawberries grown in vertical farms on the shelves in certain markets where the price of that product is much more expensive. I'm also optimistic about the role of breeding in the context of vertical farming. And I think we don't talk enough about that. I was recently at the University of Guelph, which is Canada's top agricultural university, and I was meeting with a researcher there that's breeding for space travel. And what he was able to do is he was able to breed a plum tree that fruits consistently year round and actually grows more like a tomato. And this is actually a really important product for the biosystems for space travel. But he was able to show me it and how small and dense it is. And actually, I think it could be feasible to grow different kinds of fruit trees in the future in vertical farms, as long as they are bred in a way that's different from the typical tree right now. So I think these different scientific disciplines will start to combine and fit in with vertical farming, and the varieties will get more compelling. I don't think we're going to have avocados in the future. I don't think we're going to have, maybe
walnuts.
some kind of, walnuts. But again, it's going to be a combination of the climate drivers that make the externalities of water and infrastructure for traditional agriculture too expensive, the technology improvements around environment control, and also the breeding. When these things start to merge more, we're going to start to see some really interesting products come out of these farms.
Do you think the breeding industry is picking up speed?
I don't think they're I don't think, I think not.
When it comes to this,
it's too small of a market for them right now. Yeah. I think we're seeing more of them engage in it. KeyGen is one company that's really looking at this. I think that a lot of the seeding companies and the big ones are looking at this. They're just investing very small relative amounts to it, but that will increase over time.
Exactly. So how do you feel about genetic engineering as a tool to speed that up? Do you think that consumers, let me ask you about the other side of the ocean, about North America, are going to accept this when it gives them the benefit?
I think in North America, most consumers are not concerned about genetically engineered product. There are some very vocal consumers that do care about it, and some retailers and growers that are going to emphasize that they're GMO free. But I think that in Europe, the context is very different. I think it'll be more difficult in Europe. Again, I think it really depends on how bad the drivers of that climate category I mentioned are going to be. If the drivers are so significant, governments and institutions are going to have to accelerate the use of GMO to respond to food scarcity issues. Yeah. And I don't want that scenario to happen necessarily, because I wish that climate change would be something we could mitigate. But as an adaptation strategy, GMOs will be part of that.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm going to interrupt a little bit, and we're going to have to wrap it up in like a couple of minutes.
Sure.
We already got 40 minutes of content, don't we?
Quite a lot.
It's not a problem with these gentlemen, eh?
No, it's nice.
You need some awkward questions where
Do you want to ask a
nobody
question,
knows
Mariska,
anything.
Yeah, what about you?
We have some critical question for you.
You have a critical question for me. Yeah.
Not an awkward one, but a critical one.
Okay, that's okay. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, no. But because as we are, we're engaging in a very interesting moment of time, I believe. I mean, really interesting is also to discuss what's going to work, a possible, breeding is going to be key for unlocking also the potential of vertical farming and a lot of varieties. I mean, this is something I hear from actual seed companies. They say that. And, when I remember being at Vertifarm in Wageningen University a few weeks ago, where there was a scientist named Bruce Buckby, remember that name, from Utah University, who actually was he was kind of like a little Einstein on stage, and he was writing down the equation of how he actually thinks that we can increase the equation from photon to grams of carbon. And because we all assume as farmers or as operators or whatever that is one-to-one. One photon makes 1 gram. That you can't change that. Mm-hmm. And he actually demonstrated that, you can increase that. It is possible. And that was an amazing eye-opener for me personally, because I never really fully understood the power of replacing a light source for a plant need. And it's kind of, we have it there for free, and the plant adapts to it. And there's limitations within that. But if you are really giving the plant the light it really loves and really wants, and you can do that with artificial lighting today, then you're entering a completely uncharted new territory. Yeah? And that is going to be seriously interesting. And we're going to see very short, in the short term, and also, of course, in the long term, varieties we never thought would be possible to be raised in complete controlled environment agriculture. However, we need to be aware the target is 2030, 4.8 trillion is the annual consumption of fruit and vegetables. Today, it's 2.2 trillion. Huh? So we need to really increase production, double, basically everywhere. So I can just tell a grower, who has 40 hectares, say, you need to double. How are you going to do that? And he's going to look at me, he's like, you're crazy. How can I double? I mean, I'm already, at the brink of my entire land I own. I can't rent anymore. It's just where do I go?
You have to go towards some kind of controlled
so
environment.
we need to actually really create a higher efficiency per square meter, and this is the future. Of course, as I see, hesitation is overcome by conviction when you see how it works, and then bingo, it will work. So 4.8 trillion. Remember this. This is more money than people spend on military worldwide. Huh? So this is a great number. Fruit and vegetables.
Good news for the industry.
Trillion.
Let's ramp up the capacity.
Yeah.
So in the critical
report,
question, you wanted to ask me a critical question.
Yeah.
So how to be able to do that?
Backing up.
How to be able to have that production reach those
maybe critical
targets?
could be misunderstood because I don't want to criticize you. You're doing a fantastic job. I mean, I really want to highlight how GreenTech has blossomed and has come this really interesting, exciting international event. And I think, and I had a discussion with your brand manager right before, I think, of course we attract experts, we attract B2B relations. Huh?
Yes.
What about bringing in some B2C events just to also create this little additional excitement for the industry?
Yes.
Because, one of my big obstacles I'm facing, and I've been harping about this, how do we get the European Commission to be paying attention to this?
Yeah.
Is they are not sure if this is really something they should pay attention to because the B2B relationship is always little, limited
very
for them.
economic and
I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's about consumers, customers, and voters.
Yeah.
So if we bring this all together, we have great attention.
Yeah, I really like that idea, and in my opinion, it's very, very important. We have as the main theme for this year, but obviously it will go on for decades, the circular economy, the circular horticulture.
Nice.
So that means that you have to include the consumer in it, because it's necessary to have these circular systems together, and without the consumer, it won't work. And it's very nice, of course. We are consumers as well, so we can very much adapt to that idea and think on how to create more awareness to the publicity, etc., to increase that. And I really like the energy, to put it like that, of all the different systems that are developed together. And that also makes it more possible to get a circular approach, because it's not just one system that works. It's the combination of all these efforts to have good breeding material, good food production systems on a large scale that are very efficient, very sustainable, but also to create more awareness in the cities by the consumers themselves to add to this food production and to see how it's actually grown, and to have this more connection with nature. So I believe that it's and it's just choosing or. And of course we have to focus. I think that's one of the main nice parts of organizing a GreenTech, is to put focus in what is happening in the world right now, but really emphasize everything that creates this awareness. So I'm really happy to contribute with that, and I really agree that we should take more the consumer in our midst.
I mean, I'm thinking about creating something for school kids to come by and do experiment on not just walk through the exhibit, which is interesting to them, but create maybe a little section where they can actually tinker,
experience it,
and get some of a taste of that technology.
Yeah.
It's called a
Why not?
kindergarten, literally.
Why not? I
you
think
even have the adults go in there and play around too.
Yeah.
No, you could have taste testing
That is
of
another
new
one, the culinary
products
aspect,
and how they think about, again, where the product is grown. You could have vision activities where they vote on the way they imagine the future city and circularity in food. There's really a lot of great ways to do that. I think it could be good for the branding of GreenTech as well, and useful for all all of the exhibitors.
I'm sure, and it could be like this oil. I don't know how you call it, but it can be a real movement that you start, because we cannot reach all the schools, of course, the school kids with the GreenTech itself. But we can use it as an implementation, and then start to give the example and spread the news and make it a real movement.
I'm getting all these ideas now.
Yeah,
I need to...
yeah, me too. It's really that's
All
it's
fired
very
up. That's good.
motivating. Yeah,
Yeah,
Well, we
excellent.
need each other to really do that, and like our minister Carola Schouten said, we really have to act now. We talk a lot about 2050 and 10 billion people, and to feed those mouths. But we really have to act now, and we can and we will.
Fantastic. Thank you guys very much.
Well, thank you, Maren.